a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but that beautiful.
Okay. Welcome to the Wheels and Hour Show. I am your host, Michael Phelps from the Wheels and Hour Group. Like I always say, Wheels and Hour Group is a communication group, educational group. We always talk about problems as well. We give out solutions. As solutions are only manifested through a collective, a body of work of people, folks. We all have to work together as a collective to create the changes or to make the changes that are necessary that we want to see for our future generation. Like I said, I'm your host, Michael Phelps from the Wheels and Our Community Group. Let the other king introduce himself and he can get with the topic.
Today's topic, seeing and hearing the disturbing news about violence, murders, as well as family disputes and injustice by law within our culture. When should these 5 things be considered to change the outlook and outcomes for a better society? The art of fight, flight, freeze, flop, or fawn.
Yes. And the reason why we came up with those, because I think in our culture, we don't know when to fight or how to fight, or when to take flight, or when to take flight for a purpose, or to freeze to really evaluate the situation, or to find or to patronize the situation to make it to come to a mutual understanding. Because if we don't do those things, then we might just flop out. But what we have, where there's another F that we left out was face. Sometimes we don't want to face those traumas, face those things, and we have to face them to understand when we have to fight, when we have to freeze, when we have to take flight, when we have to fawn, or understanding on how we fly. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So there's some definition, there's some understandings to these words. I don't know if you want to read.
Well, the fight response is our body's way of facing any perceived threat aggressively.
Mm. You say it louder again. Say it again.
The fight response is our body's way of facing any perceived threat aggressively.
Okay. And then we'll do two of them at a time. So let's go into flight too. I think
flight means that our body urges us to run from danger. When we go to freeze?
Yeah, we'll do it.
Okay. Freeze is our body's inability to move or act against a threat.
Okay, let's go back to fight. Okay, you said fight is the ability,
our body's
way
of facing any perceived threat aggressively.
So when you think about that, what do you think about? Because in families, you see, there's a lot of fighting going on. Mm-hmm. Either it's a fight, there's something that either is because of siblings, and then the children pick up that torch of their family's issues, mm-hmm. or there's other issues that's after those issues from the mothers and brothers issue. Now the kids have issues with their kids, and then their kids have issues with their kids. Mm-hmm. So now there's new issues that pop up in there. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with those things? How do we fight it in a way where we try to fight for the relationship instead of always thinking that every time something doesn't go the way we want it, we just take flight? Because we don't ever face the issue. We just take flight because I think that's the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. What is your opinion on that?
Well, there's this book that I read. It's called Caring Enough to Confront. Mm-hmm. I forgot the author's name. However, it talks about the importance of addressing issues in a way that promotes relationship. Because often when we confront something or confront somebody or confront a situation, we often come aggressively. And we also have a tendency to use you statements. Mm. And when you start using you statements, of course, you're blaming. You're pointing fingers, you're not taking any accountability at all. Exactly. It's you. And of course, the person who's on the receiving end of that you is of course going to go into defense mode, and they're going to come back with their own yous. Exactly. So, and it's almost sounds like a bad starter. You. But anyway, but when you take the approach, when you take the approach of a saving or preserving or promoting or cultivating a relationship, then you have the conversation and you take responsibility for how you feel. It's not you made me feel this way, it's I felt this way when this occurred and that occurred. And it's okay to say, I felt this way when this occurred and that occurred and that occurred, because what that does is it gives the other person an opportunity to change or to make adjustments. Yeah. But when we use you statements and we accuse somebody of being something, like let's say someone's an idiot. Okay? Well, you've defined them as that thing. Mm-hmm. Once you've defined them as that thing, you don't give them any way out to being anything different other than what you have defined them to be. And define them to be that way, you've already programmed yourself to think that they are that thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it says the power of life and death is in the tongue. Right. So whatever you speak in existence, so should it become, so should it be done, so should it be accepted by and perceived. Because you can have a fight with somebody, and the reason why the fight gets aggressive is because certain choices of words are being used, as you were saying, right? Mm-hmm. So if I said y'all being ignorant, okay, the word, when you're using the word, it might not seem like you just aiming it at them particularly. You're saying your being. So that means being mean you talk about the characteristic trait at this moment.
Right.
But people will perceive that as you calling them ignorant and all throughout their whole life, you know. So that's where the fight, that's when the fight becomes aggressive. You know. So when that comes about, you have to figure out when do you freeze to think first before you respond. You know, I don't know if that helps on all occasions, but that might be something that as us as a collective should learn how to do. If we froze sometime in thought with intents and with compassion, maybe the fight won't go so aggressively and we won't flop out, if that makes sense.
Well, you know, that would require a person to listen. And what I mean by that, there's another term called effective. It's called effect labeling. And with effect labeling, you're labeling or acknowledging a person's feelings.
Yeah.
Okay. When people express things, an expression, we all express things different ways. And oftentimes when we express, and I mean, a disagreement, you know, oftentimes language is being used, even sometimes nonverbals are being used. You know, sometimes you might see the rolling of the eyes. That's expression. You know, you might make a sound. You know, that's expression.
Yeah.
You know, you might start whispering in the ear of the person you're expressing something, or you might just downright just say, "Oh man, here comes this." You know, and all of those ways of expression. However, we should always want to know the engine behind the expression. And when you effect label someone, meaning that you have an interest into knowing the why behind the motivation of the expression. So if someone's expressing, you know, oh, you know, you sound irritated. Oh, you sound angry, or hey, you know, did something irritate you? Did something bother you? You know, it's like, because if you just concentrate on the words, it's like you said something a little bit, you know, a few seconds ago, we talked about, okay, you guys being ignorant. Well, guess what? The person who receiving it is not going to hear the word being.
Yes.
All they're going to hear is ignorant. Yeah. That's the only thing they're going to hear. Everything else, everything before that, gone. It's like it was never said. And then if you try to clean it up, oftentimes once they get to their emotions, then that's kind of that's a part of what we're talking about here today. When we're talking about flight, freeze, and you know, and fight. If you're talking about the chemical, you're talking about the chemical release that takes place in the body. You're talking about the change in the heartbeat. You know, you're talking about the change in how it affects, you know, the blood vessels and those kind of things. You're talking about a startle response. You're talking about what in the term for it is SNS, and it means sympathetic nervous system. However, there are two nervous systems that operate at any given time, depending on your response. You have sympathetic nervous system where you're going to find your flight, fight, freeze. However, there's also what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which reels in the emotions. It's almost like it pumps the brakes, and that's when you're talking about freeze, take a moment to kind of reassess the situation, and think before you move, think before you proceed,
and make sure you don't want to flop out of the situation.
And that's what the parasympathetic nervous system does. Is it assists with that. It grabs a hold of the amygdala where the emotions take place in the brain, and it reels that in quickly, and it shifts it over to what you would call the left side of the brain. And the left side of the brain is where evaluations take place. Yes. You know, everybody, you know, you got a creative brain, and you have an evaluative side of your brain, or a rational brain. And the left side is a rational side, and the right side is a creative side. And oftentimes, when we get into our emotions, when the amygdala takes over, and we're in that fight, flight, or freeze. We're in that our sympathetic nervous system. All those things have kicked in, and we're everybody responds differently. Some people will hightail it and run, and some people will buckle up. Well, hey, let's fight. Let's fight this out. But oftentimes, still emotions are involved. In those particular instances.
Yes, and they're very and when those emotions are high, it releases a lot of dopamine, which gives people a lot of energy to go forward aggressively. And sometimes you have to take a moment to freeze, and you have to ask yourself, do I want to flop out of this situation? Do I want to flop? And what flop is what we're going to use flop as in this thing is fail. We don't want to fail and lose our relationships with one another because we have allowed ourselves we took the stance of fighting in the wrong cause with the wrong fight. Because there's different fights that you can fight, right? Because you don't have to fight where you be aggressively, where you're attacking. You can fight for the relationship. You can fight for the reason that you believe that y'all should stay, that y'all should mend this thing.
Right.
But you have to understand, you have to freeze too, because you have to understand maybe it ain't this time. You have to find. Sometimes you have to take the find position, which, and find tells you what did find tell you again?
Find is a reaction to a threat that involves trying to please someone to avoid conflict. But this also can be an appropriate response to threats like abuse.
Yes. So you have to know these because all these things have different meanings. You know what I mean? Fight can go both ways. It can be a positive, it can be a negative.
Right.
So you have to understand all these things have a positive and a negative effect.
Right.
So you have to. That's why I said you have to take the time to freeze so you can assess all the mobility. Like you named a lot of the chemicals, the mental, the emotional states.
Cortisol is the main chemical that gets released into the body. It's a stress hormone,
and it tense up the muscles.
Yeah, and it causes you to shut down. It
stop listening.
Yeah. It affects your eyes.
Yeah.
When you end up with tunnel vision, it affects your ears. Where like I said, you're not listening. You're just talking, yelling, however you're responding, walking away.
Or you can get your eyes get bloodshot, where you just tunnel vision, where you want to attack, and you can't see nothing positive in the way. Everything is charged like a bull.
Right. So those are all the things that we have to consider when dealing with this. I mean, because really the whole point behind this as we continue on is self-awareness.
Yes.
You have to be aware of who you are and how you respond to typical situations, because oftentimes when someone says a word is just a word until we add meaning to it. Okay.
Put an action.
Yeah, it's like when we add meaning to it, if someone says idiot or whatever word, those are trigger words. They're trigger words, right? Yeah. But it's up to you how you allow it to affect you, though. It's like, someone can use it, someone can say it, but it doesn't make it so.
Yes.
Until you make it so for you because of your chosen response to that word or those words or those actions. That makes sense.
Yeah. Or you generalize it as this person. I can't believe this person will say that to me, which will make you go into a different response. So sometimes you have to sit back and freeze and say, maybe I trigger something in that person for them to say something out of made the person to see me act this way, instead of saying, because you notice that they don't say that on a daily basis. This only happened during this argument. So sometimes we can get caught up so much in our emotions at the moment, we would just take everything for face value. But just yesterday, we were just hugging it out. You know what I mean? So now that we having this little debate or something dispute about something, now we use, it's just almost like when I sit back and I be thinking, I'll be watching a lot of posts and I see girls say, "Oh, be this, be that, be that." They're calling each other out their name, and it's nothing's taken personally. Then, but as soon as they get upset, all of a sudden that word becomes it becomes arrows of destruction. It becomes poisonous darts.
Well, now we're talking. Let's see, when you talk about that, now you're talking about context.
Yes.
Depending on the context of the situation, and the other words, what's going on at the time.
Yes.
If everybody's getting along and everybody's just kind of happy-go-lucky, whatever the case may be, no one's really taking anything serious. You're just laughing and hee ha ha. But then when it turns serious and then that word is used, then it's taken different or it's interpreted different.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I interpret it this way when we use it in this context. Now I'm interpreting it this way when we use it in this context. But the reality is that, in my opinion, is that it's not good to be used in any context.
Yeah, it's derogatory.
Because it's derogatory.
Yes.
But that's just my take.
But that's just
an example.
And that's just an example that people will take things, and sometimes sometimes it takes when people are going through something and no one knows.
Right.
And so you can be playing with somebody, and then a person
take it serious.
They take it serious because they don't feel like playing at this moment.
Right.
So therefore, anything you say, it can be used, like they said, against you in a court of law.
Right. It's like, man, I just said this to you 3 million times. Yeah. Today you're gonna take it serious. Yeah. Man, we play like this all the time, and that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
And it all depends on your mood. So in other words, what it boils down to is the meaning that we apply to that. How we define that particular situation. That's really where the emotion originates.
Yes.
It
comes from the things you just named, like with the chemicals your body releases, the tension, all the things that like when you're going through something. Right. What kind of chemicals is released from when you're stressed out?
Well, you think about it, endorphins make you feel good.
Yes.
However, but cortisol doesn't. Cortisol comes along with depression and sadness and fear, those kind of things. And then when people get really angry, then adrenaline kicks in. Okay, and then they get mad strong.
Mad strong. Red.
So it's like all of those things. So we have to be mindful of our bodies, know ourselves, and like you said something pivotal earlier, which makes perfect sense, and that is any of these things can be positive and negative at any given time. Sometimes you can fight the wrong way, you can fight the right way. You can take flight the right way or the wrong way. Okay. Yeah. If you take flight because you're trying to avoid a situation, you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to work things out. That's part of the wrong way to take flight. However, if you take flight because you realize that you're heated in that moment and you need to go take time, that will be the absolute perfect time to take flight. Yeah. Just let the person know, hey, you know what? I'm too mad right now to have this conversation. Give me a little bit. I just need a long time. I just need to be left alone. Yes. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. No. That is the perfect time to take flight.
And you don't want to take flight and then run to the, like if even in any type of, say within relationships, within family, within marriage or whatever, the worst flight to take is when you take flight and run to someone else and discuss your personal business with the outsider who who doesn't have your best interest. Now, if you're going to take flight and then you go to a huddle within yourself where you can rationalize the information or the situation and then come back and lay it on the table and then you work on it. But if you just take your flight because you want to hear sound bites from other people to fill in those endorphins, those things that makes you feel good at that time, or to agree with you, then that doesn't help your situation. That's the wrong fight. And that's the wrong flight. So that's what happens that's what's been happening in our culture and within our community. We assume that we're going to go and take flight and take it to someone else just so they can feed us they can feed our egos and our pride, make us feel like, okay, you're right, he's wrong, she's wrong, and it fills in it fills in the things that you want to do anyway.
But that's called, there's a term for that, which you're discussing right now, just to kind of help people out. It's called confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm. Say that again.
Confirmation bias is what that's called.
Yes. Explain confirmation bias for those who don't.
Confirmation bias is where you go and you look for people to agree with you. Like what you were just saying, it's like you've already got your mind up the way you see it, and you're not going to talk to anybody or even look or read any kind of literature that's going to present a counter argument that may even give you some enlightenment, a different perspective, a different way to see things. You've already made up in your mind the way you see it, and you're only going to talk to people who are going to agree with you, agree with the way that you see it. So that's a perfect example of what confirmation bias is, and that's something else that we got to really be mindful of, because when you want to resolve an issue, when you want to preserve a relationship, the last thing you want to engage in is confirmation bias, because that means it's all about you want to be right no matter what, and when you want to preserve a relationship, it's okay to be wrong. Matter of fact, it's even okay to apologize when it's not even your fault. Why? Because you're trying to preserve the relationship the way you see it as, you know what, if this is the route that I got to take to preserve the relationship, I'd rather preserve the relationship than be right. You know, that's a very mature move. That's a very loving move. And that's
selfless.
That's a selfless move.
Yes. And that's what a lot of times we don't do. We don't think selfless. We think selfish. Mm-hmm. You know, and so that will lead us into confirmation bias, because we're being selfish.
Right.
And sometimes we have to. And not trying to say all situations aren't warrant for a way out or a way to see something. Sometimes you have to look at bigger pictures, but that takes people to sit down and humble themselves to look more further into a picture. It's easy to look through a people than it is to look at a big picture window, because in the people you're focusing on the person that's in front of the hole. But on the picture window, you have to look at it. You'll see a lot of different things in the environment, and then you miss the most important part that you need to see. So a lot of times that's what we do in relationships. That's what we do. That's why a lot of times you see more fights in families, because people they're looking through the big picture window, but not focusing on the issue at hand, the root issue, like you always said, the root issue. But you're looking at the beautiful things on top, but you forget the roots is what it needs to be pulled up. You can see that the weeds is choking out the beautiful things that you planted within yourself, but you don't look. You try to go in and just pull it from the top, and then you forget that you got to go deeper down. You got to dip your hands in the soil and get down in there, pull that root up, and that requires work.
Yeah, and that requires
getting dirty and work.
Yeah, it takes a willingness, and you have to be deliberate about that.
Yes.
That's not something that is going to be your go-to or the first thing you think about, because oftentimes most people want to be right in any argument. Most people want to be right. They when they need somebody to come along and say, you know what, you were right. Yes. Everybody wants to be right. Everybody wants to get as many people on their side as possible. Yeah. But the thing is, again, while you're winning people to your side, you're losing the relationship. And that's what you don't want to do. You don't want to lose a relationship. And there's no learning. There's sometimes there's I've told people there's no learning in winning. And what I mean by that is, everybody wants to, the person who always comes in first, they don't learn anything. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they're never pushed to go beyond the limits. They go beyond their limit of winning. But a person who falls in second, third, fourth, and fifth place, they're always learning. They're always learning lessons. They're always growing. They're always getting stronger, and they're motivated. You know what they're motivated by? Number 5 is motivated by number 4. Number 4 is motivated by number 3. And number 3 is motivated by number 2. And number 2 is motivated by number 1. And number 1 is motivated by nobody. So it's just, and, so the whole point of me saying that is that this is something that I've had to learn, but it's okay to struggle, because in struggle there's growth. Yeah. And so it's okay to have those hard conversations, because having those hard conversations is growth. But if you're so determined to be right and not to be wrong, then you miss those opportunities to learn, because you always want to be first. And I'll say there's more benefit to being second, more benefit to being third, more benefit to being fourth, and so on. Because it motivates you to try harder. It motivates you to have to acknowledge where you might be falling short. It motivates you. And that's where the growth is. That's where the maturity is. That is the best cultivation that there is to be in those situations where you're forced to grow, forced to acknowledge, and forced to make changes.
Yes. Well, because you learn a lot more during irritation than you do being well pleased. When you're irritated by things, you focus on what's irritating you. You start to examine why you're irritated. You start to focus on that, and you start to understand. But when you're being pleased, what you do, you overlook how you're being pleased, because sometimes, I think we was talking about it last time, sometimes people think that other people are supposed to make them happy. Mm-hmm. That's no fight in that. Mm-hmm. If you only focus on someone else's capability to make you happy, or to cater to every need and won't tell you the truth, mm-hmm. then you're not winning. You're not losing. You're not gaining anything. Right. You're just settling for what they call a position, mm-hmm. into a space where you feel like you are you are the number one center, mm-hmm. into the thing. Like you said, number one. Mm-hmm. You're number one. But sometimes you got to remember, you're not always going to be number one. Mm-hmm. In the time that there's other things that come up. In families, you might be liked, but then there's going to be times you're going to be disliked. Mm-hmm. There's going to be times you're going to have to make decisions that everybody is going to not like. Mm-hmm. Then there's going to be times you're going to make decisions people are going to like. Then you're going to have a decision where half people like and half people don't. So it's a check and balance on your own ego to understand that everything is not always going to be catered to you, mm-hmm. or to make you feel good. Right. So, and when the difficult situations do come up, when you have a difficult task or different decisions that you have to make, you're not going to be well liked at that particular time. But it's a presidential decision that you have to make, mm-hmm. and sometimes you have to do it in the most, either in the subtle way, or sometimes to be aggressive. Mm-hmm. Because some things warrant aggressiveness, and some things warrant a subtle way. Mm-hmm. But either way it goes, either it's subtle or aggressive, you're not going to be liked by everybody. Mm-hmm. You're gonna ruffle someone's feather. Mm-hmm. And you can't take flight all the time, because you're going to have to stand and face it. Yeah, you're going to have to have a conversation at some point. Yes, or it's going to stay the way it's is, or you're going to flop out. Right. Yeah, and that's where you find yourself flopping. Is more or less along the lines of brooding. Yes. Where you allow a situation to simmer and continue to eat away at you and eat away at you and eat away at you, because you never deal with it. Every time you come within feet of that situation, or feet within that person, within feet of that person, or anything remotely that remotely reminds you of that situation, whatever the case may be, you definitely want you kind of almost like a deer in the headlights. Mm. You stuck. Yeah, you stuck, or you flop. You're like, let me go over here. Over here. And it's like, no, stop flip flopping around like a fish out of water. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. Yes. When you have to have those difficult conversations, you're going to flop around. You're going to feel like you're a fish out of water, and that's okay. Yes. Because the thing is that the thing to remember, we're talking about fight, flight, freeze.
We're talking about those things, talking about when your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. The way you get that parasympathetic nervous system to kick in is the first and foremost thing you got to do is breathe.
Yes.
Because the more oxygen your brain's in, what it does is it provides oxygen for your brain. When your brain gets oxygen, then things calm down. Okay, your heartbeat starts to calm down. Your blood, now more blood, your blood is starting to go to your extremities and things like that. Because when you get stressed out, all the blood gets pulled in from your extremities. You won't be able to do things like even unlock a door, or turn a doorknob. That's when people talk about how they freeze. They can't even open the doorknob. They're scared to death. They can't even open the doorknob, and they're just flipping out. They just lose it.
It's like when you see a trauma, you see somebody pass away in a tragic death of a car accident. Your body just goes to a point where you can't focus. I mean,
right.
you can't. Right. Your motor skills are lost because
right.
you're in a state of shock.
Right. State of shock. Right.
And so you have to kind of understand that state of shock don't always have to be in that aspect. It can be how you deal with family members, how you deal with your relationship. You can go into a state of shock and you lose yourself.
Yes.
And you don't get a hold of it. You have to figure out how to get back a hold of yourself, because that's how people, when they go into a state of shock, they're allowing someone else at work get in their ear because they seem to think that they are going to be better than the person that you're with. So now you're sitting in this state of shock because now he's like, oh, he makes me feel different. She makes me feel different. She's caught in the way I'm feeling right now. And you get into that state, and then you'll find yourself flopping out of the relationship because because someone came in and led you astray, took you to a car accident, showed you the damage, showed you the injured person over here, and not knowing that you were just as injured as the person as you was in the car crash with the person. But since you made it out, you're looking at the other person as they're the only one that's hurt, but you hurt too because you got in an accident with them. It just affected you out too differently. One might be physically, the other one emotionally. So that's how we got to look at it when we talk about these relationships. We talk about these 5 F's. It's a psychological thing, and we don't look at the psychological issues, what goes on with a lot of our traumas within our relationships with our families, our community, at work. And this thing, at work is just as much traumas. You can catch a lot of traumas at work that affect you at home, or you can have some home issues that affect you at work. You know what I mean? So those two, and both of them are at work. You at work more than you are at home. So imagine you at work and taking on all the stuff you got at work, and you bring it home. So sometimes you have a relationship, you have a date at work. You have a relationship at work of people, of a man or opposite sex, because you at work and you go home and take it on your wife. You know what I mean? And because you refuse to fight for the relationship because you allowing someone else to give you an ear orgasm. And so now you are stimulated because you at work most of your time. So when you get home, you're on the what? You have 3 to 4 hours a day. So you're looking at, I spend more time over here with him or her than I am at home with my husband. He ain't doing this, he ain't that. So you start to focus on the wrong thing.
You become distracted.
Yes. So, that's when you flopping out.
And you technically, what you start engaging in is what I would probably call emotional bias.
Yes.
You say, well, man, when I go home, I got to deal with this, too much reality for me. So I'd rather go to work. And it's really, and it's funny because when you go to work, you think that things are easier at work because you assume because you're only experiencing that person at work. Yes. But what most people don't realize is that once you start to experience that person, that situation on a personal level, then you see the real them. Yes. Because you're only experiencing the work them. So therefore, it's almost that confirmation bias or emotional bias where you're like, ooh, things seem like there's so much greener on this side until you see them at their house, or until you start living with them, or whatever the case may be, until you see them outside of work where they take that suit off, or you start seeing their messy hair and start smelling their dirty feet, and then you realize they're a regular person.
Yeah.
You know, because you become infatuated with what you see.
Yes.
If
You,
that
you,
versus
you gave up the fight, you took flight,
yeah,
and you flopped out on your relationship. And because I witnessed this at work, there was one of the regionals at work. Everybody was talking about it.
mm-hmm.
This guy, he always bring her lunch,
Mm-hmm.
do all these nice things,
Mm-hmm.
gestures, so he's always doing it. Everybody's like, man, she's married, and in the work family, people talk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's being talked about.
Rumors start flying.
And rumors are flying from behind the scenes, but for some reason, the two people that don't hear them is the two people that's actually involved in doing it. Mm-hmm. But and the husband and wives that sitting at home, they don't know what's going on.
I have no idea that this is going on.
So, but they making a mockery out of themselves because people are speaking about them on behind their back, but get up in their face, be smiling and giggling and talking, and But this is the stuff that how you can identify with fighting, flight, and freeze, and flop, and find, and how these, because you choose not to face what you need to face at home. Mm-hmm. So you'll rather take flight because something makes you feel good over here, mm-hmm. or you'll give up the fight because this person is stimulating you at this moment.
Right.
And you're finding when you do go home, you find your husband because you're just trying to get along because you just don't want to. Because either you're trying to figure out an exit, you're trying to find out an exit to get out of there. So you're patronize that person by but you'll hold back on certain. A person knows because you start holding when you start to engage, you start withholding from certain things. You start holding from sex or emotional connection or communication. Not want to talk, don't want to cook, and or be preserved in your little corner. Mm-hmm. So these are the things that happen, and this happens in family too. It's not just in a husband and wife. This happens in family. So when you get a whole family together, you see people standing over here because they don't want to engage. They don't want to do it because someone said something that they didn't. Even if they said something in a crowd, one person took it personal, internalized it, and made it about them. Mm-hmm. And so now they upset with the whole family. I ain't coming around them. I'm like, okay, but that was an individual conflict. But you made it. It was a singular conflict. You made it a pluralistic conflict because now you involving all of us. You taking out everybody else because you had a personal vendetta against that one individual that you never took the time to go and find out what they actually meant. And this person probably don't even know that you was upset with them. We get that a lot of times. So you took flight away from the whole family because you refused to fight for keeping the family together or keeping the relationship. So you took flight. So now you flopped out. And now everybody got to suffer because of one little incident. And that incident probably was 10, 17, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we deal with this all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we deal with it because we touched on last week. It's because a conversation that should have been had was never had.
Yes.
That's just what it boils down to. Sometimes one may have tried to initiate a conversation. Mm-hmm. Maybe it wasn't received. Yes.
Or looked at as it being genuine.
And when I say received can mean a number of two different ways. Receive meaning on the other end, the person don't want to talk about it, you try to initiate it, or when I talk about communication, I always use the analogy of tennis and communication. It's like in communication, when you encode a message. That's what it's called. You encode a message, so that's the serve. And when you hit that ball to the other side, that person on the other end, their job is to decode the message. That's how they receive it. Okay, but oftentimes, what sometimes happens is people don't decode the message properly. So they'll send a message back. They'll encode their own message. In other words, okay, yeah, the ball landed on my side, boom. without even thinking about it, they're hurry up and hitting the ball back because they didn't take no time to decode the message at all. But they want to hurry up and encode the message back to the person who encoded the message first. So now what do you have? You have conflict. Okay? You have a person that says, oh, you're not listening to me. You don't hear me. You don't see me. Okay? What I have to say don't matter. So since what I have to say don't matter, then why should what you have to say matter? Now you have a dead ball. You got a dead game. Because because the game of communication can only work when two or more people are involved. But when you're not, and when I mean involved, I'm not just saying being present, but you have to be actively involved, actively trying to understand, actively decoding and encoding information, messages back and forth. And when both people are actively involved in trying to preserve the relationship, then what happens to fight, flight, and freeze? It goes away. You know why it goes away? Because now you're in a relaxed state. Now what happens is you've gotten rid of SNS. Now you've introduced the parasympathetic nervous system. Now you've entered into the rational mind. Now you've entered, now you're talking. Now you're really communicating. Now the relationship is growing. Even in the midst of conflict, the relationship is growing. Why? Because both people feel like they're being listened to. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I was thinking about when you talk about tennis, and conversation can go so many different ways because even if we say tennis, we'll say football, we say basketball, baseball. People sometimes they have to, when they serve, they try to do tricks with their serves to throw you off. Conversations go that way sometimes too.
Yes.
They can throw a curveball at you, and you have to decode that ball and know that his stance, the way he's positioning his foot, he's about to throw a curveball.
Mm-hmm.
So the person that's sitting out in the left field or the pitcher, he's looking at that. A batter, he's looking at how he's going to throw that curveball because of the way he's positioned his feet. Or he's throwing signals now to tell the umpire how he's going to throw a ball. He's going to throw a fastball. He's going to throw it up. He's going to throw a high ball. He gives a signal, but sometimes people misinterpret or don't even see the signal. We was talking about that on the highway. We was talking about the highway of communication is paying attention to the signs. Right. The signs lead you to the destination. Sometimes if you don't pay attention to the sign, you look up, you end up in a roadblock. Right. Or you end up in a dead end. Right. Or you end up in the wrong neighborhood. Right. So you have to really pay attention to these signs. So because it helps you navigate to either to get there on a shorter distance or a long distance. It's up to you how you decipher the information or how you take the time to understand. I want to take the shorter route, or I want to take the longer route. Sometimes you take the longer route just because you want to see the scenery, right? And you want to enjoy the ride. But sometimes you just want to get there because you're tired, or something else. And with that, we call it a relationship. When you're tired of something, when you're doing something, you'll take the shorter route and end up in the worst case scenario.
And so you're taking that shorter route. Then with that's equivalent to not being even consciously aware of the conversation.
Yes.
That means that you're not actively or consciously present.
Yes.
That's passive conversation. And no one wants to speak, no one wants to have passive conversation with someone, because you have passive conversation with someone, then what that simply means is that they weren't really paying attention. It's almost like, back in the day when, you ask mom, often it was mom, not dad, but mom be in the middle of doing something, talking on the phone or cooking, whatever the case may be. You go in there, you ask something that she normally say no to, but you ask her when she's in the middle of something, she says she waves you off, and in your mind, well, that means go ahead. No, that means go away. But you chose to interpret it as go ahead, and so what I'm saying is that those kind of things we have to be mindful of. We have to be mindful of how things are communicated and what is being communicated. Oftentimes we get so caught into the emotion that we're not paying attention, or we get so caught up in the words that we're not paying attention to the emotion behind the words. Yes. Yeah. And you want to listen to the emotion behind the words, because it's behind the words that's going to give you the information that you need on how to proceed.
Yes.
But if you just look at the words, then the words is where the triggers are. Okay, all you hearing is you again, that's dealing with that weed above ground, right? Yeah. So you're like, you're not dealing. See, when you go to the root, you're dealing with the emotion behind it, behind the words. When you're dealing with just the words, you're dealing with that weed above ground. So in other words, even though you have a communication dealing with that weed above ground, it never gets resolved because you only dealt with it above ground. But when you deal with the emotion behind the words, then you acknowledge when a person is telling you in a roundabout way that they're hurt. They may not use necessarily the word, they may not necessarily say I'm hurt, but you can decipher from what they're saying. You can hear the emotion behind the words, like, man, you sound like you hurt. And they might say, you know what, you're right, I am hurt. You know, and when you approach that, when you take that approach, that's that effect label I was talking about. When you take that approach, now the conversation is going the right way. Now, what that does is that causes the person to come out of a defensive mode and into a conversation mode. Yeah. And that's what you want, because it's the conversation mode that helps relationships. It's the conversation mode that brings about resolution. It's the conversation mode that brings about the peace. It's the conversation mode that brings about growth. That's what you want. Yeah. But if you stay in that, if they stay in their defense mode, you stay in your defense mode, you ain't hearing them, and they ain't hearing you.
You know, and it's kind of, I was thinking when you were saying that, I was thinking about, it's almost like reading someone is like reading a thermostat. Mm-hmm. You know, you got two settings you can set it up for. You can set it up for cold, you can set it up for heat. And then you know that your higher numbers is your heat, and your lower numbers is your cooling system. So when you're dealing with people, you got to know what thermostat you're dealing with them at. So when you said something that might have triggered them, you knew you turned it up. Right. So now it's hot in the room. Mm-hmm. How do you turn the heat? How do you get it to cool down? You got to de-escalate the situation. You have to de-escalate. You have to hold yourself accountable. Be responsible for what you said. Take initiative to understand how the person feels. Understand why you had to fight, why you fighting for this relationship, why you must take flight at that particular time. Why should you freeze for a moment to understand? Because when you freeze, you can look at the thermostat. Mm-hmm. And you can see, okay, man, they at 90. Right. I got to turn them down. Get them to turn down. Get them to turn down. Yeah. Or they just too cold to me. Mm-hmm. Maybe I did something, maybe I cheated, or I did something made them cold towards me now. Right. I need to get them back hot again. So I got to go do some self-evaluation, because there were some behaviors or some action that I had done that affected their behavior. Right. You see what I mean? Right. So learn the thermostats of people. Right. If that makes sense. Oh, it makes perfect sense. I mean, you know, that goes right along. We were talking about reading the room last week. You got to read people. And that takes, again, and I use that word again, you got to be deliberate about that. Yes. That's not something you want to be passive about. You want to be deliberate about that. Yes. Reading people. Because it's like, whether it be your mate, whether it be your children, whether it be other family members, whether it be other people in the community, whether it be a clerk at, inside of at a gas station, or, a cashier, or a server at a restaurant. Mm-hmm. You got to read people. You got to know when people are uncomfortable. You got to know when you've asked a question, you can see a change in their behavior ever so slightly. That, oh, did I offend you? Oh, acknowledge it. Hey, no, I didn't mean to do that. And then it's up to them to say, oh, no, I'm not offended. And they might have been, but because you're not acknowledging, they're no longer offended. Because now they realize, because what they've just done is they've added context to it. Oh, okay, they said this thing, it triggered me, but that's not what but they didn't mean it that way. They didn't mean to offend me. They just told me they didn't mean to offend me. So now I've removed it out of the context of being offended to the context of no longer being offended. And that's what you want. That's how de-escalation takes place. Removing the stimulus out of the situation, removing the stimulus out of the conversation, so that you can have a helpful conversation.
But you have to be deliberate about de-escalation to do that.
And and you have to understand that relationships are like dirty. It's almost like dirty hands, and you have sanitation stations all over the place. So you would rather walk around with dirty hands instead of going to the sanitation station to kill the bacteria.
Right.
When you're dealing with relationships, sometimes you have to kill the bacteria. That's why you have sanitation systems there, which makes you sit back and freeze to understand that, okay, I can go wash my hands, and I can use this sanitation that's going to kill the bacteria, going to kill the things that cause that's going to cause further germs to cause it to spread.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to do certain things to get to that sanitation station. Right. Our culture is dying because we have lost the way, because we forgot whose we are to know who we are. We the most spiritual beings that there is, but we are so disconnected in some aspect in the collective form, collectiveness. Because one of our commandments, there was two commandments that was given: love thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul, and love thy brother and thy sister. And when we forgot to love each other, but we said we love God. He even said, "How do you say you love me, but don't love the brother and sister you see every day?" We forgot about that saying. We will we hate someone and then say, "Oh, I love my God though." So we gotta be careful with the type of language. That's what's a sanitization. See, that's that dirty mouth, that dirty hand, that dirty thinking. It needs to be sanitized. It has to be re-sanitized. It has to be something to kill those germs, kill that mindset, and we have to go to those sanitation stations to get that mindset clean, because we're in a dire state right now that we need that we know that this earth is ending. We know things are coming to a halt because we see the signs, and we have to answer for the way we treat each other. We have to answer to how we confess him with our mouth, with lip service, but our hearts are far from him. When are we going to start to understand it? That's why we're using these words: fight, flight, freeze, find, and flop, and then face. It's going to take us back to our scripture, take us back to the holy veil of understanding. Because with those things in place, you can use your scriptures in the most harmonious way, where it help elevate you, it help get you out of that rigor mortis mindset to a metamorphosis, so you can metamorphose into something greater. We are dying inside because we have lost our way of loving one another. We talk about this all the time. Mm-hmm. It's hard. It's hard to try to make people love you, or you try to love people, because people have got cold. Like I said, the thermostat on them is off, either off or it's on, or it's on, or you just have a fan blowing. The thermostat. Yeah, you say I got the heat on, but all I do is feel cold air. Well, you feel cold air because you got to turn it on. You got it on, the fan on. See, there's things you have to do to get it to work. That takes understanding. Mm-hmm. That takes knowledge. You have to have that knowledge of what the thermostat is capable of doing and what needs to be done for it to work properly. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it does. Again, you have to be willing to help that person turn the thermostat down if it's turned too high, or turn it up if it's turned down too low. Yes. There's no one way of doing anything. Multiple ways of doing things, but even in your multiple ways, there's only one right way. Yes. If you understand what I mean by that when I say that. And that right way is right for that person. And as we know each other, we're now talking about triggers. If you know certain things trigger certain people, and they told you, they educate you on the fact that certain things trigger them, then why do that? Why do what triggers them? unless you don't care. You know, because a person who cares, a person who loves, is their goal is not to trigger somebody. You know, I don't care. You just got to get over it. Okay, you know, fickle feelings and there be emotions. You know, and it's like, you know, you say that to the wrong person and see what you get. You know, they're not going to respond too kindly to that. Because why? Because they're going to feel like, you know what, you're not validating me. Okay, you don't care nothing about me. Okay, you saying my feelings don't matter. I mean, man. I mean, if you've ever had this conversation with a wife, you know, they let you know. You know, hey, my feelings don't matter. Okay. Go ahead and make yourself something to eat tonight. Okay, my feelings don't matter. Okay. See if you get any for a long time. Okay, my feelings don't matter. I mean, man, it's like no, be careful if you treat somebody that way. You know, because again, this is other centered, not self centered. Okay, and when you care about people, when you love people, when you know we talk about loving your neighbor, when you love people, then they should be at peace living next door to you. Okay, they should be at peace sitting next to you in a movie theater.
Yes.
Okay, they should be at peace sitting at dinner with you in a restaurant. Okay, they should be at peace if you're serving their food and they're going through a drive-through. They should be at peace. They should be at peace knowing that you're not going to do anything to their food. You know, that's loving somebody. You know, you're making sure they should be at peace knowing that because you're preparing their food behind closed doors or behind a wall, which they can't see beyond, that you're not dropping their stuff on the floor, picking it back up and then serving it to them. They should be at peace to know that you've taken care to make sure that it made it from the stove or the grill, whatever the case may be, that it was properly prepared with gloves, or whatever the case may be, it was properly packaged and then delivered to them. And then they can eat in peace. But when they have to worry about whether or not you did something to their food, and then you behind closed doors or behind a wall, whatever, and you're laughing about that. I mean, those are the kind of things. That's that fight or flight or freeze, because the person has to look at you and wonder if, man, oh man, I just got into it with them last week. I got to worry about whether they will get my food, mess with my food or not, man. Let me go ahead and get up on out and start food because I can't trust them. I'm afraid that they're gonna do something to my food. Or if you go into a restaurant, sit down restaurant, and you find out they're your server, you're like, no, we need to go eat someplace else. You see, you shouldn't have to worry about stuff like that. Yeah. But people carry that kind of stuff. They carry that kind of anger and unforgiveness and stuff around on the inside. They brood over things and they allow those things to cause them to engage in bad behavior. And those are the things that we've got to be mindful. We've got to be better at. That makes sense.
Yeah, and the thing about, I want to go back to the thermostat analogy.
Yeah.
The thermostat of life operates through 4 seasons in people's lives. Mm-hmm. There's 2 seasons that you turn it off completely because you don't need it because the weather balances itself out. So you got your spring and fall where you don't need your thermostat, but then your summer and your winter you need it. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So remember that we have 4 seasons when we're dealing with people. You don't know what season the person is in.
Right.
So once you understand what season they're in, you know what thermostat to work to operate and how to operate it. Mm-hmm. Because if it's cold, you need the heat.
Right.
But when it's hot, you need the cool.
Right.
So and when and then when it's going into your fall and spring, you can cut it off. Mm-hmm. You might have to cut it on sometime and cut it off. Frequently. But that's just understanding the person, understanding the season, or understanding the temperature of that day.
Right.
So that's what we're dealing with. So it's almost like, to me, it's almost like another analogy I want to use. I want to use the elevator. Okay. When we are dealing with people, we get on it. We the first step we do, we get with people. We're pushing the button on the elevator because we want to go to a certain floor. And remember, you can go to the top floor, which is where that's their anger. You can go down to the basement. That's where they depress at. You want to go to the right floor when you push the button. Right. And like I said, once you understand fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop, and an even face, it gives you a better understanding on how to utilize the thermostat, the elevator, and the sanitation.
Mm-hmm.
They all work hand in hand of understanding. So this is how we got to deal with our community.
Mm-hmm.
We got to learn to use these things as I call it a weapon of choice, or emotional understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people get so caught up in their own understanding that they lack other people's understanding,
Mm-hmm.
or they just took the wrong floor and got up on the wrong floor.
Mm-hmm.
So now they got to walk down all these flights of steps to get back down to them.
That requires work.
Yes.
I mean, it's not that it can't be done. The question is, were you willing to do it?
Yes. And if you're in a wheelchair, or if you got so bad with your attitude, it crippled you. Now you can't go down the step. So you have to push the button again and try to get the elevator to come back so you can take the elevator back down. Right? You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So don't allow your attitude or your anger to cripple you, where you can't even. If the elevator stops and the power is out, you're stuck on that floor.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Yes.
But I'm just so I'm kind of glad this is a good it's a good topic, because it gives us a lot of. Every time you say something, you make me think about all these analogies,
Mm-hmm.
and I see how it can better me. Because a lot of this time when we talking, it just ain't really, to me, in my understanding, it's not really for just the community, it's for me too. Right. So I'm learning as I talk. When I'm sitting here having these conversations, it makes me start to evaluate a lot of different things. It makes me see a lot of different things, and I'm like, man, I'm growing with my audience, right? And I'm able to share with them my growth, mm-hmm. and my potential, where I want my potential growth to be, right? Mm-hmm. So if that makes sense,
it does.
And
where are we at? So we've already talked about fight, freeze, fawn, flop, coping mechanism where someone becomes physically or mentally unresponsive to a stressful situation. It's also known as appease or submit response. Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's something that we, if we're not careful, we engage in. I mean, that's why we have to be consciously aware, because the thing is that often these things, when they're habits, these things occur on an unconscious level. You don't even know that they're occurring, because you've entered into the automatic brain, where your brain goes into what's called efficiency mode, automatic mode, where your brain is like, you know what, I'm gonna they're called make things more of a direct line, where things are gonna be easier. We're gonna make things easier. So I'm gonna put these things in the automatic brain, or the unconscious. And so while you're concentrating on that, I'm taking care of this over here. And that's what, because our brains become very efficient, so that they don't get burned out from trying to do too many things at one time. And so when it comes to our emotions, when we allow things to become habits, good habits, great. If it's a good habit, stay with it. If it's a bad habit, you want to break it, because bad habits cause you to be enslaved, and you become stuck. It prevents you from progressing. It prevents you from growing. It prevents you from maturing. It prevents you from seeing things seeing other perspectives, or even considering other perspectives. I mean, when you enter into bad habits, those things you want to break. And no one's saying that it's easy. It's not easy to break a bad habit. You have to be, here comes that word again, deliberate. You have to be deliberate about breaking that bad habit. And the better you know yourself, the more you become consciously aware of your actions and your behaviors and your responses and your triggers. When you acknowledge that you have a trigger, when you acknowledge that you have a certain response to certain things you said, Now you're consciously aware. And when you become consciously aware, now you can consciously, meaning in the moment, deal with it. And the more times you deal with it, what happens is, you know, because what happens when we get into habits, we establish neural connections. Those neural connections that's how habits are formed. And so it says neurons that fire together, they wire together. Okay?
Yeah.
So you have to learn, we have to get into unwiring some things that have been wired together and wire new neurons together. And the only way that can be done is to let the old habits die and let the new habits take their place.
Yes.
That requires growth. That requires us being deliberate. That requires us being consciously aware and redefining things. If we don't redefine things a certain way, okay, we have to redefine that thing so that we can grow and so that our relationships can benefit. Go ahead.
You know, and I was thinking, I said, imagine if love was a heat-seeking missile, and the missile only can hit a body that puts out heat, right?
Right.
So if love is in this heat-seeking missile and it has to hit a target, right? That means that target has to radiate something,
right,
for that missile to attract it, right?
Right.
So if we saying that we are the children of the Most High, that's enough. That should be the radiation right there. That should bring that missile to us, right?
Mm.
So why is it deflecting us? Why is it avoiding us? It would rather blow up in the air than hit one of us. You know what I mean? I'm just using that as a metaphor.
Yeah.
You know, because we're
instead of drawing, we're repelling.
Yes. We're not drawing it like we should.
We're repelling. We're making it go away.
Yes.
Right.
But you know, but they say that you can destroy another missile by hitting it with another missile. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's something in it that's knocking that missile away before it can get to us. Our attitudes, our personality, our characteristics, our behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
All
of those contributors.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So maybe there's some things we can think about.
Oh, they are. I mean, and like I said, it takes each individual to do that for themselves. Mm-hmm. No one can do it for you. This is something you have to do yourself. When people give you feedback, you know, I learned a long time ago, feedback is really intended to be a friend. It was never intended to be your enemy. But there is such thing as a negative way to give feedback. There's a negative way to coach. There's a positive way to coach. There's a negative way to coach. There's a positive way to say things. There's a negative way to say things. So of course, I encourage you to get a little better at not allowing the things that people say to get you riled up, because it's a distraction. Is what it is. It's a distraction from the rational. There's nothing wrong with saying something about what bothered you. I think it's good to say something. Hey, you know, but choose your words wisely. How you choose to address that thing, how you choose to fight. Name calling, not a good way to fight. You know, but simply saying, hey, when you said this, I felt that. Okay, it made me think about this, or it took me to this place, or whatever the case may be. Now, depending on how that person chooses to respond, you'll know whether they're vested in you or not. If they care enough about the relationship, then they're going to acknowledge what you said. If they don't necessarily care about the relationship, or they might even verbalize, I don't care how you feeling. You know, I don't care what you think. I don't care. Look, that's your problem. Okay, well then that pretty much tells you that you probably didn't limit your interaction with that individual, with that person, because that person has just told you they don't care.
Yeah.
Now, but I would tell you this though. Sometimes, because you said something earlier that was important, and that is sometimes you don't know where a person's at. Sometimes You don't know what a person is when they say they don't care. Okay, they may not care in that moment because they didn't tell you what was going on with them. But so I say that to say this: it's imperative or important that you don't close the door and leave it shut. If you have to close that door momentarily, if you have to walk away momentarily,
Take flight.
if you got to take flight momentarily, do what you got to do to preserve the relationship. Because yeah, sometimes if you stay, you're gonna say something that you can't take back. Death and life lie in the power of the tongue. Those who eat it, those who eat the fruit thereof. If you eat up, you eat the fruit thereof. So those are things that we have to be mindful of the things that we say. We can't once those words are out, we can't take it back. So we want to slow things down for ourselves. It's okay to fall a little bit, slow things down, and think about it. There's another acronym that's helpful. It's called RADAR. It's called recognize, assess, decide, and then act, and then review. You always want to go back and review your actions, and determine whether or not you took the right action. It's almost like what people do after a football game. They go back and they watch film. They review. They review the game to see what the things that they did well, things that they can work on. And when we have conversations with people, depending on how the race, it's okay to go over what went well, because whatever went well, you want to continue to do those things. But those things that didn't go so well, those things you want to make adjustments in, because you may come across somebody else and you make those adjustments that you made may make that next conversation or that next interaction with another person go better than it did with this one over here. So that's why it's important that you go back and take a look.
And that's when you understand the seasons of individuals. Everybody has a season. You're not gonna run across. You might be in your spring where they could be in their fall where they're shedding things. You're growing, or you might be in the cold dead of things where nothing is growing, it's stagnated, or you might be in the summer where everything's blooming. You have to know what. Sometimes you have to assess to know where a person is at. If you use the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop, and face technique, it will give you a way to understand those seasons when you're dealing with people. Because sometimes, at a season when someone's in the winter, that's when they're in the most dormant and cold state, you might have to take flight. But that doesn't mean you take flight because flight, you can take flight, like we said, there's a positive and a negative way of taking flight. You can take flight after you said something crazy. You know what I mean? Or you can take flight and say, you know what, let us reassess this later when we both got a calmer head.
Press pause.
And before you take that flight, sometimes you have to freeze and listen. So then when you do go and take that assessment, you have taken enough mental notes so you can come back and say, okay, you can go into your room of evaluation. You can sit back and say, man, okay, they said this, I said this. Okay, when they reply, I reply this way. Okay, now I see where it went wrong. I should have probably worded, instead of saying you, I should have probably said us, or I could have said we, I could have said our. You know what I mean? So you give you a chance to do this, and now you can go back and fight for the relationship, and because you don't want the relationship to flop out. So this is why because then what that does, it makes you go back and face the reality. So that's why I said, so if you use those fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop and face techniques, we'll have a better outcome and a more cultural understanding or cohesion or understanding, because each culture, everybody has their own culture. Well, how they do things in their house, that's their culture. And you cannot go into someone's home and tell them, if they say take your shoes off when you come over, it's not your job to get upset because you got to take your shoes off. Now, if you don't want to take your shoes off, you just don't go over there. or buy you some hoodies.
Simple solution.
So it's always an understanding of how do we choose to fight, and how we choose to take flight. Now we can take flight in that instant and say, well, you know what, I'm gonna get some booties and I'll be right back.
Right.
Or maybe my feet don't smell the best when I take my shoes off. So you know what? Hey, I'm gonna go and wash my feet before I come in. You know, whatever reason there is, there's many reasons.
Or you can just simply say, hey, you know what? My feet smell. You don't mind? I'll take them off, but you know, is it okay if I keep leave my shoes on? Because sometimes by making a simple request, a person may make an adjustment and say, you know what, it's all right if you leave your shoes on this time.
Yeah.
You know, just by making a simple request, rather than get mad. There's ways. You know, we figure out ways to do other things. Let's figure out ways to communicate effectively.
Yes.
You know, instead of ineffectively.
Yes. And that's where love comes in. That's when you hold the candle of love and it shines through the most darkest moment. And if you use that love, the candle of love, you're going to be able to shine that light to a point where people are going to be able to see your heart. They see your good intention. A lot of times we bring out a candle, it's all beat up, but it's not lit. You know what I mean? So it isn't producing nothing when it's not lit. But once it's lit, and the shape and the deformity of it, and you say, man, this candle's really been burning because they actually tried many times more. Versus just pulling out a brand new candle, it looking all beautiful, you'd be like, oh, what is that candle? It hasn't done nothing, but it's just
Look at it. That's about it.
Yeah. So it's those things. It's just small things, small gestures that makes it. It goes a long way. You know. But we about to what time do we have here? You know, 6 weeks. Okay. So what you want to do your final thought?
Well, my final thought is whether you engage in sympathetic nervous system or parasympathetic, when you find yourself freezing, you find yourself fighting, or find yourself flopping or fawning, or even facing, those things don't have to control you. You can control them. Like I said, if you find yourself in any of those situations, take a moment, just breathe, get some oxygen, allow some oxygen to enter the situation. When you allow oxygen to enter the situation, meaning pause. In the Japanese culture, there's a saying, it's called ma. What it means, it just simply means pause. They said in our culture, we always feel like we gotta insert something. When they tell you in speech not to use or those kind of words, or but, or but, or whatever. But it says in the Japanese culture, it says when you use ma, it's like meaning it's an empty space. There's no need to fill it in with anything. It's okay to just take a pause and just and wait for the next thought to arrive. Choose your words wisely. That will promote growth. That will alleviate and de-escalate situations.
And sometimes we have to increase our vocabulary. We don't want to fill in words with cuss words because we lack the art of communicating. So we use simple words, now they call them emojis and all that. But curse words were the first emojis. Those are things you fill in the blanks, and it makes you sound dominant when it actually is just destroying the relationship. Because you tell your kid to go clean your M&M room, are you actually getting the point across? You're really damaging the child instead of saying, hey, I asked you to go clean your room. I ain't gonna ask you again. This is what I want you to do. Let me show you what I want done. See, now you gave an instruction and you're showing a concept of how you want it done, and then you give the child a choice to understand. Okay, I must do this consistently. So now you gave them the understanding. Okay, stop fighting with me.
Right.
You're not going to take flight because you got things to do.
Right.
You're going to freeze and listen to me.
Right.
Because I'm not going to allow you to fawn me.
Right.
And you're not going to flop out.
Right. And
you're going to face this chore no matter what you're going to do.
Right.
So if we use these things, we can use them in so many different ways. You know what I mean? And it would really help our vocabulary, and it would really help us understand on how to deal with one another.
Right.
And that's the key. And like I said, toolbox is an understanding. You can go into a field, which we call a field of relate. You can go into a relationship as building a house. I'm coming in to build this relationship with this woman or with family members or whatever. I come in with a hammer when it required me to use a blueprint or required me to take a tape measure. It required me to take some pliers. It requires to take me a screwdriver. But I come in with a hammer. What do you think I'm gonna do in that relationship? I'm gonna cause damage because it was not required at that moment for the hammer. Now the hammer is going to be useful because that's why it's in the toolbox. It is not required at that particular moment. So certain conversations can be a hammer. It can be banging on people, hitting people, battering people, when you actually could have took the time to measure the situation out and say, you know what, something ain't right. This something's short. Something's missing. It needs another length. It needs another foot or something. Maybe or it might need me to read this blueprint a little bit more and say, you know what, okay, maybe my multiplication chart is off because I didn't add the right balance on this. I didn't put the right footings. So that's why you use these that's why you have these tools. So I'm just saying, use these tools in the best way you can, because this is what makes us a more productive society. We should be right now. We should be a state of nation building. We should have a nation by now because we're nation building people. Everybody comes together with their gifts and talents and bring it to the table, and everybody utilize what they have. Yeah, we're gonna have disagreements. Disagreements are good because disagreements push us forward. Because everybody's ideal, maybe everybody's ideal ain't gonna be utilized at that moment, but it can be utilized later on. And our disagreement is not to make us fight to the point where we're gonna hurt each other, but it can make us fight to the point where we come up with solutions. Or we might have to take flight and say, you know, it's time, I got to take a flight from this for a moment because it's getting hot, heated, and we're not getting anywhere. So let me freeze for a minute, because maybe I have to find certain people to understand, okay, and to get something out of them and say, okay, well, maybe this person don't want to talk. So I got to find them a little bit to get them to open up, because they might have some good ideas. Because we don't want this thing to flop. Right. But we do have to face this whole issue. See how that thing works? So that's what I'm saying. So we just got to learn to utilize these things. And like I said, we as an hours is the same tool. It's the same tool. You know, what I do affects us, affects our community, affects us as a whole. So just remember, if Pookie and Tyrone, Pookie's my son, Tyrone is your son. You're working all the time. Tyrone's left alone. Tyrone is you trying to work to provide, and maybe you only have one income. I have two incomes over here, or I got two people I'm supporting. Yeah. So therefore, my child has a little bit more. It's more stable because it's got two people. It's got a balance. So Tyrone is coming over all the time because he don't want to be at home by himself. But I am worried about my son Pookie, and I'm ignoring Tyrone. Knowing Tyrone needs something too. Not saying I'm going to replace you as a father, but as your absentee, I've become the village. So what I'm going to offer to Pookie, I'm offering to Tyrone. So therefore, Tyrone will get jealous at my son Pookie, then take Pookie's life, or try to hurt Pookie because he wants what Pookie has. You see how that thing works? That's the understanding. That's the tools that we need. We don't do that no more in our communities. We used to have that, remember? Remember how they all grew vegetables and they all got in the middle of the street and they were Grandpa and Miss Starks and all them, Miss Lucas, Miss Scott, and everybody come in the middle and they give out, they shared. We never went without. You go in the house and you see all these vegetables and fruits all in the house. And that's because everybody gave to each other. And when someone didn't have enough for their kids, the community came in and helped provide. Where did that go? We got people, we live next door to people and we don't even talk. We might wave at each other, but we don't talk. I don't know nothing about you. You don't know nothing about me. All I know is what you look like and what you drive and what your house looks like on the outside. That's it. Maybe once in a blue moon, you'll tell me, oh, somebody, oh, man, I just seen some car pull up at your house. I'm just letting you know. I didn't know who they were. But that's not effective communication. Back then, it was intimate. We had intimate relationships in the community. People actually watched each other out. You didn't need no door dings. You didn't need the cameras. You had neighbors. We had neighborhood watches. Where did all that go? And if the tough guy and them say don't touch their house, don't touch their cars, that was warrant. You did not touch their car because the neighborhood guys say, hey, don't touch their car. Don't touch their house. Don't touch nobody else. They can leave their doors unlocked. We don't rob in this neighborhood. We don't do this. But see, all that went out the door. When we stopped communicating, we stopped being consistent, when we stopped committing to each other. That's what happened. We get back to those things, we be good. But we us and ours, love, life, and loyalty. Peace.
A rich man's world.